5 terrifying, true scary stories of abandoned houses with dark secrets. When I was young, I used to think the stories people whispered about abandoned houses were nothing more than tales to keep children out of danger. But as I got older, I came to understand that some of these stories weren't just cautionary tales. They were warnings. What you're about to read aren't the made-up fables of imaginative minds. They're rooted in the real, terrifying experiences that have haunted my town for generations. You might choose not to believe me, but I feel compelled to tell you these stories, if only to lift a bit of the weight that has pressed on my chest for years. These aren't legends or myths. They're echoes of lives forever marked, and sometimes ended, by their encounters with these houses. Each of these places, every old, creaking floorboard, and every dusty corner has its own tale of tragedy and mystery. These homes didn't become vacant by accident. They were abandoned, left to rot because they are cursed. Some say it's the land itself that holds these secrets, that even the most beautiful properties hide horrors just beneath the surface. Others believe it's the things that happened inside the walls, the arguments, the deaths, the unsolved mysteries that cling to these places like thick, suffocating fog. And if you're foolish enough to venture into any of them, don't be surprised if you find yourself feeling observed. Some folks think I've become obsessed with these stories. Maybe they're right, but once you've seen the things I have, once you've felt those cold hands brush against you, heard the whispers that shouldn't be there, you'll understand. There are threads linking each of these places, threads that form an ominous tapestry I've been piecing together over the years. With every story, with each new scrap of knowledge, I find myself drawn closer to a disturbing conclusion about our town. Now, I could just tell you what I've discovered, lay it all out plainly, but that would ruin the fun, wouldn't it? Some of you want to be scared, to feel the chill in your bones. So I'll let you uncover the clues for yourself, to pick out the hidden hints and mysterious connections between these houses. I'll be your guide, but remember, I'm not here to keep you safe. You'll learn that most people who step inside these homes don't make it out unchanged. A few, the lucky ones, only leave with nightmares, the type that keep you up at night, glancing toward your bedroom door. But the others, they don't always come back. Or when they do, they're not quite the same. Some wander out, hollow-eyed, unable to recall what they saw inside. Others, well, let's just say their loved ones remember them with an uncomfortable mix of pity and terror. So if you're brave enough, if you're one of those people who's always believed that fear is just a trick of the mind, come with me. Let me show you what lies behind the locked doors, the boarded-up windows, and the peeling wallpaper of these houses. These stories, woven together, form something much darker than any single legend could. But remember this, the more you know, the harder it is to escape. Each house I'll tell you about sits like a rotting tooth on our town's otherwise pristine landscape. People move here, they see the charming streets, the cozy shops, and they think it's a peaceful place. They don't see the shadows lingering just out of sight, don't notice the spaces in between where the sun never quite seems to reach. But if they stay long enough, if they listen closely enough, they'll start to feel it, a strange heaviness, a chill that no sunny day can chase away. And the townsfolk? They're good people mostly, but they know better than to wander too close to certain places. They know which streets to avoid at night, which houses to cross quickly, their eyes fixed firmly on the ground. They might not know every detail of what happened in those homes, but they understand enough to keep their distance. And in this town, that's often enough to keep you safe. As you read these stories, I want you to remember one thing. Curiosity has a price. Every tale here cost someone something, whether it was a small piece of their sanity, their health, or their life. Each person who stepped into these houses paid for their curiosity. And if you're not careful, if you let your imagination get the better of you, you might just find yourself haunted by these tales too. It's a peculiar thing about fear. It doesn't simply go away. It burrows, digs in deep, and waits for the quiet moments to resurface. And when you're alone, maybe late at night, maybe in that liminal space between waking and dreaming, you'll hear it. A whisper, a faint, persistent creak in your floorboards. Maybe even the distant hum of voices. And when you do, just remember, these stories are more than just words. They're warnings. So let's begin. Story 1, Haunted Houses on the Hill. Perched ominously on a desolate hill, the mansion known as the Widow's Peak looms over the town, casting shadows even on the brightest of days. Its tall, ivy-covered walls and broken windows watch over the valley like a silent sentinel. For years, the locals have whispered about the house's unsettling aura, sudden drops in temperature, eerie lights flickering in the night, and a chilling breeze that seems to rise from nowhere, even on calm days. Few dare to go near, and even fewer dare to enter. Jake, a stubborn teenage boy known for his boldness, had often laughed off the stories about Widow's Peak. To him, the tales were nothing more than superstitions designed to scare kids away from exploring. But when his friends dared him to spend a night inside, he found himself unable to resist. The challenge was straightforward. Spend a night in the Widow's Peak mansion and come back with proof of his stay. Armed with a flashlight, his phone, and a barely hidden sense of dread, Jake made his way up the winding path to the house as the sun set behind him, casting the mansion in a blood-red glow. The front door groaned as he pushed it open, revealing a grand but decayed foyer, once ornate but now heavy with dust and decay. Chipped paint peeled from the walls, and thick, dusty cobwebs dangled from the ceiling, swaying slightly as if disturbed by unseen hands. Jake shone his flashlight around, catching glimpses of tarnished portraits and faded wallpaper, all bathed in shadows that seemed to move with him. He inhaled the stale, cold air, already feeling the rumored chill seep into his bones. Determined to prove his bravery, he ventured deeper into the house, the old wooden floors creaking beneath his feet. With every step, the quiet of the house seemed to amplify, growing heavier and pressing down on him. He wandered through abandoned rooms, what seemed like an old parlor filled with decrepit furniture, a library with shelves lined with books swollen and warped from time, and finally, a grand staircase spiraling up into the darkness. Curiosity drove him forward, each creak of the floorboards echoing in the silent halls. As he passed a series of rooms, he began to notice a distinct chill in the air. The temperature seemed to drop, making his breath visible as a faint, misty fog. His flashlight flickered, and he stopped, glancing around with a growing sense of unease. Then he saw it, a door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar as though beckoning him. The door, unlike the others, was intricately carved and had a thick layer of dust, suggesting it had remained undisturbed for decades. Jake swallowed, his heart pounding, and he approached. Pushing the door open, he entered what appeared to be a nursery. The room was small and dimly lit by the pale moonlight streaming through a cracked window. In the center of the room sat a small rocking chair, covered in dust, but positioned as if someone had just left it. The walls were adorned with faded floral wallpaper, and the remnants of old toys lay scattered on the floor, coated in dust and neglect. As Jake took a step forward, the chair creaked, rocking gently back and forth as though moved by an invisible hand. He froze, holding his breath, as the chair continued its slow, rhythmic sway. An icy dread trickled down his spine. He glanced down and spotted an old, worn diary lying on the nursery floor, its pages yellowed and fragile. The cover was embossed with the initials YELL. Intrigued and unnerved, Jake crouched down, picking up the diary with trembling hands. The leather cover felt brittle and cold, as if it had absorbed decades of sorrow. He opened it and began to read by the light of his flashlight. The entries were scrawled in a delicate, looping script detailing the story of a mother's loss. The diary belonged to a woman who had once lived in the mansion. She wrote of her infant son, a child who had fallen ill and passed away before his first birthday. Her grief was raw and powerful, filling every word with a sense of longing and despair. Suddenly, a whisper filled the room, low and soft, like the wind but unmistakably a voice. "My child, where's my child?" Jake felt a shiver run through him as the voice grew louder, full of sorrow and desperation. His eyes darted to the rocking chair, which was now rocking faster, as though someone invisible sat there, anxiously waiting. In a panic, he stumbled backward, his flashlight flickering wildly as he searched the room. And then he saw her, a faint, ghostly figure of a woman standing near the rocking chair, her face shrouded in shadows. She wore a flowing white dress, tattered and stained, and her eyes glowed with a cold, spectral light. Her expression was one of profound sadness, and her lips moved as she murmured, "Where is my child? I can't find him." Jake's heart raced as he clutched the diary to his chest, paralyzed by fear. The figure drifted closer, her sorrowful gaze locked onto him. It felt as though the weight of her grief was pressing down on him, stealing the air from his lungs. The chair continued its relentless rocking, and the woman extended a hand toward him, as if pleading for his help. Unable to endure the intense dread any longer, Jake turned and bolted from the room, sprinting down the dark hallways, his footsteps echoing in the silent house. The temperature seemed to drop even further as he fled, and he could feel the chilling presence following him, her whispers growing louder in his ears. He didn't stop until he was outside, gasping for breath as he stumbled down the hill, clutching the diary. But as he reached the bottom, he realized something had changed. The air felt different, heavier, as though he had brought something with him. And in the days that followed, Jake began to notice strange things. Faint whispers in his room at night, the feeling of cold hands brushing against him, and shadows that seemed to move just out of sight. It was then he realized that he hadn't escaped the haunting. The diary, a physical reminder of the woman's grief, seemed to carry a piece of her spirit with it, binding her sorrow to him. And no matter where he went, he could still hear her mournful whisper, endlessly searching for the child she had lost, a sorrow that would never let him go. Story 2. Abandoned Homes by the Lake. Along the fog-draped shore of Lake Elmswood lies a line of decaying cottages, each slumping with age, roof tiles missing, and walls darkened by mold. Locals call them the drowning houses, an unsettling name given to them because of the legend that surrounds the lake. For generations, rumors have circulated about how those who drown in the lake are never truly gone, that somehow they find their way back to the shores, seeking a place to haunt. No one can remember who first spoke of it, but whispers claim that eerie lights appear in the windows of these cottages at night, and strange footprints lead in and out of the doors long after dark. Despite these warnings, Mira and her friend Sarah decide to venture out one gray afternoon, eager for a thrill. The sky is heavy with mist as they make their way down the winding trail that leads to the cottages. The air feels damp and carries a faint metallic tang, a smell that both repels and draws them in. Mira, the more adventurous of the two, flashes a grin over her shoulder, holding up her flashlight. "You ready?" she asks, her tone playful but with a glimmer of unease beneath it. Sarah hesitates, glancing at the lake. The water is still, like a mirror, reflecting the low-hanging clouds. "I don't know, Mira. Maybe we shouldn't. People say these places are cursed." Mira chuckles. "That's exactly why we're here, isn't it?" She nudges her friend gently. "Come on, nothing's going to happen. It's just a story." Reluctantly, Sarah nods, and together they push open the rotting door of the nearest cottage. The smell hits them first, thick, musty, tinged with mildew and something else they can't place. The walls are blotched with dark green mold, and the wooden floorboards creak under their feet as they step inside, illuminating the dim space with their flashlights. They move cautiously through the room, eyes scanning the sagging furniture and faded wallpaper peeling from the walls. The air inside is thick, and it feels as though the cottage itself is watching them, breathing them in. Sarah shivers, wrapping her arms around herself. "Look," Mira says, pointing to the floor. At first, it seems like nothing, but then Sarah's eyes widen as she sees it, a faint, glistening trail of water. Wet footprints, appearing slowly and silently behind them, as if someone had walked in right after them. Myra's pulse quickens, and she glances back at the door. It's closed. No one else came in. They exchange a nervous look, and Mira forces a laugh. Probably just a leak in the roof. Sarah shakes her head. "It hasn't rained in days, Mira. But Mira presses on, determined to stay brave. They move further into the cottage, passing through rooms filled with broken furniture and belongings left behind, as if the former occupants had fled in a hurry. In one corner, an old armchair slumps under a dusty throw, and the walls are lined with faded photographs, almost too worn to make out. But one photograph catches their eye, hanging slightly askew from the rest. It's an old family portrait, yellowed with age. The faces of the family members have been violently scratched out, leaving only the outline of their bodies, each surrounded by claw-like gashes in the paper. As Mira reaches up to touch the frame, a soft, almost inaudible sound breaks the silence. A low whisper, drifting through the cottage like a cold breeze. It seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, winding around them. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispers, her voice trembling. Mira nods, unable to tear her eyes from the portrait. It sounded like someone calling. The whisper grows louder, and Mira turns toward the window, her gaze drawn to the lake. She sees something, a faint figure, a pale shape at the water's edge, standing motionless. The figure's outline is soft, blurred by mist, but as Mira stares, it begins to take shape. A woman with dark, flowing hair, her eyes wide and hollow, her lips moving soundlessly. Suddenly, a sharp, desperate voice echoes through the cottage, cutting through the stillness. "Help me, please." The figure by the lake stretches out a hand, beckoning them forward. Mira and Sarah exchange terrified glances. The voice sounds real, as if it's coming from right beside them, filling the room with a thick, suffocating sense of dread. And then, as if pulled by some unseen force, Mira feels herself stepping forward, her legs moving almost on their own. The woman by the lake stares at her with empty eyes, her hand still reaching out. Behind her, the lake water churns, dark and thick, and something stirs beneath the surface, an indistinct shape rising slowly from the depths. "Mira, don't!" Sarah yanks her back, breaking the spell. The room feels as if it releases its hold on her, and Mira stumbles backward, clutching Sarah's arm as if waking from a trance. Together, they turn and race out of the cottage, slamming the door behind them as they run, heart pounding and breaths ragged. Only when they're back on the path, far from the cottages, do they slow down. But even in the safety of daylight, the silence feels ominous, heavy. The mist clings to them, dampening their clothes, and the lake glints darkly in the distance, as though watching them leave. That night, Mira lies awake, replaying the events in her mind, unable to shake the image of the woman by the lake. Her face, her hollow eyes, her voice, it all feels too real. She tries to push it away, but every time she closes her eyes, she hears it again. "Help me, please." The haunting doesn't end with the lake. In the days that follow, Mira begins to hear the voice in her dreams. Every night, it calls to her, growing louder, more desperate, filling her mind with images of dark water and shadowy figures. She sees the woman standing by the lake, and now she's closer, reaching out with skeletal hands, her face contorted with anguish. The whispers follow Mira everywhere. She hears them in her room at night, in the quiet of her home, in the empty spaces where silence should be. The lake has claimed a part of her, and no matter how far she goes, she knows it won't let her go. Months later, Mira finds herself drawn back to the shore of Lake Elmswood, unable to resist the call. She stands by the edge, staring into the dark water, her mind consumed by the endless whispers, and in that moment, she understands what the drowning houses are truly for. They are not just homes, but traps, places where the lost linger, waiting for others to join them in their eternal sorrow. As Mira turns away, her reflection lingers on the lake's surface a moment longer, watching her with hollow eyes. Story 3. The Mansion with the Locked Basement. High on a hill, hidden behind tall iron gates and a wall of overgrown ivy, stands a mansion untouched for decades. Its grand columns, towering windows, and luxurious facade once made it the pride of the town. But now, the mansion's silence is ominous, and a thick blanket of dust covers every corner. Local legend has it that strange noises echo from its basement at night, though no one has dared venture close enough to confirm it. Yet for Tom, an urban explorer with a taste for the unknown, the promise of treasure rumored to be hidden within is far too tempting to resist. One chilly evening, Tom stands at the gate, flashlight in hand, his breath misting in the air. The mansion looms above him, its windows dark and hollow like empty eyes staring back. The silence is overwhelming, pressing in on him, but he brushes it off, convincing himself it's just the wind rustling through the ivy. He pulls a small crowbar from his backpack, forcing open the rusted gate, which groans in protest, disturbing the stillness. Inside, the mansion feels even more eerie. He walks through opulent rooms filled with abandoned furniture draped in sheets, chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, their crystals dulled by years of dust. Portraits of solemn-faced figures line the walls, their eyes seeming to follow him as he makes his way through the darkened halls. A creeping sense of unease stirs in his stomach, but Tom pushes it aside. The basement is his destination, the place where whispers of hidden riches and dark secrets lurk. Finally, he finds the door to the basement. It's an old wooden door, slightly ajar, its handle tarnished and cool to the touch. Tom hesitates, peering down into the shadows below. The stairway descends steeply, disappearing into darkness. He takes a deep breath, switches on his flashlight, and steps down, each creaking step echoing off the narrow walls. As he descends, Tom's light catches something that makes him stop. Scratch marks, deep and desperate, cover the walls on either side. Long, erratic trails gouge the plaster, like the marks of someone or something frantically trying to escape. Tom's heart pounds faster, but he tells himself it's just old damage, perhaps made by animals. He presses on, feeling the air grow colder and thicker, as if weighed down by years of sorrow. At the bottom, he finds himself facing a heavy wooden door secured with thick chains and an old, rusty padlock. His fingers tremble as he examines it. The lock looks ancient, its iron covered in layers of rust. But there's something unsettling about the door itself, a feeling, almost a warning, urging him to turn back. Ignoring it, Tom takes a deep breath, pulls a bolt cutter from his backpack, and snaps the lock. The chains clatter to the floor, their sound unnaturally loud in the confined space. Inside, the basement is an unsettling mix of the familiar and the grotesque. He shines his light around, illuminating dusty shelves stacked with old toys. A teddy bear with one eye missing, a rocking horse chipped and cracked, a small doll with faded clothes, and a wide, glassy stare. His flashlight passes over a small wooden crib, its mattress shredded and moldy, and he feels a chill as he realizes these objects belong to children. Then he hears it, a soft, echoing sound like distant footsteps coming down the stairs he'd just descended. Tom whips around, his flashlight jerking wildly across the room, illuminating shadows that seem to shift and crawl along the walls. His heart thunders in his chest as he scans the basement, but he sees no one. The footsteps continue, slow and steady, each one bringing a fresh wave of fear crashing over him. Suddenly, the basement door slams shut, and Tom's flashlight flickers, plunging the room into darkness. He scrambles to switch it back on, his hands shaking. The light comes on again, but now the basement has changed. The dusty toys, the furniture, they're gone, replaced by rows of iron shackles bolted into the walls, some with frayed bits of cloth and what looks disturbingly like old bloodstains. He backs up, hitting the cold stone wall behind him, his mind racing. He doesn't understand what he's seeing, but he feels a suffocating sense of dread, as if he stepped into a nightmare from which he cannot wake. Shadows dance across the room, forming twisted shapes, and he realizes he's not alone. A figure steps forward from the darkness, a woman with hollow eyes and a face contorted with sorrow, her form ghostly and transparent. Tom tries to scream, but no sound comes out. The figure raises her hand, pointing to him, her voice echoing through the room, filled with years of pent-up rage and sorrow. "Why did you come here?" she whispers, her voice barely audible, yet terrifying in its intensity. "We were forgotten, trapped, abandoned just like you will be." He feels a weight on his wrists and looks down in horror to find shackles binding them, biting into his skin as if they had been there for years. Panic surges through him as he tugs against the restraints, but they won't budge. The ghostly figure moves closer, her eyes full of a grief too deep to fathom. Around her, other figures begin to appear, small, shadowy forms of children, their faces pale and hollow, reaching out to him with skeletal hands. Tom is forced to watch as a nightmarish vision unfolds before him. He sees scenes of children held captive in this very basement, their cries muffled by the thick stone walls, their small hands scratching at the walls in desperation. The woman stands over them, not as their tormentor, but as a tragic, powerless figure, unable to save them from the horrors that took place here. With a final, desperate surge, Tom wrenches himself free from the ghostly chains binding his wrists, stumbling backward. The vision fades, the shadows retreating, and he's alone in the basement once more, the air heavy with silence. His flashlight flickers back to life, illuminating the empty room, though his wrists still burn where the shackles had held him. He scrambles up the stairs, his pulse racing, feeling as though unseen eyes are watching his every step. As he reaches the main floor, he slams the basement door shut and races through the mansion, out into the cold night. Only when he reaches the safety of the street does he finally stop, gasping for air. But the escape is only physical. In the days that follow, Tom can't shake the memories of that night, nor the strange, bruised imprints around his wrists, as if the shackles had left a permanent mark. At night, he dreams of the basement and the faces of the children, their hollow eyes fixed on him, begging for release. Tom swears off exploration, vowing never to venture into places so dark and forgotten again. Yet even in the safety of his home, he feels a lingering presence, a cold chill that settles in the corners of his room, watching, waiting, as if the mansion's spirits have followed him, a silent reminder of the horrors he uncovered. And deep down, he knows that the basement door is not closed for him alone. It is closed for all who dare to trespass on the secrets buried within its dark, haunted walls. Story 4. Abandoned houses with hidden tunnels. On the edge of town lies a row of old, weathered houses, each seemingly frozen in time. The structures, some leaning dangerously to one side, are connected by a maze of underground tunnels rumored to have been used during Prohibition. Over the years, however, whispers of more sinister uses began to spread. Secret rooms for rituals, hidden chambers where people vanished, and unexplained markings left on the walls. Most locals avoided the area, but for Marcus and Lucy, two amateur historians with a taste for adventure, the promise of uncovering forbidden history was irresistible. It was late afternoon when Marcus and Lucy arrived, the sun casting long shadows that stretched across the cracked pavement and broken windows. The air was thick with an eerie quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of crows. Marcus adjusted his flashlight, eyeing the houses with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Lucy, a sharp-eyed and quick-witted partner in all things mysterious, stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the largest house at the end of the row. "Ready?" she asked, a glimmer of anticipation in her eyes. "Absolutely," Marcus replied, though a chill ran down his spine. They entered the first house, their footsteps stirring up dust that danced in the fading light filtering through cracked windows. The interior was a chaotic blend of peeling wallpaper, sagging furniture, and remnants of lives long forgotten. Photographs, broken trinkets, a child's abandoned toy. But it was the trapdoor in the center of the floor that captured their attention. With a grin, Marcus swung it open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. They took a breath and descended into the shadows below. The tunnel was cold and damp, its walls lined with bricks covered in strange, jagged marks. At first, the markings seemed like nothing more than graffiti from years past. But as they moved further into the passageway, the symbols grew more complex, forming intricate patterns that twisted and spiraled, evoking an unsettling feeling neither could shake. As they ventured deeper, a faint whisper seemed to echo through the tunnel. They paused, glancing at each other. "Did you hear that?" Marcus whispered. Lucy nodded, frowning. "It's probably just the wind, right?" They continued, the whispers growing louder, though the words remained just beyond comprehension. The walls felt as if they were closing in, the narrow space pressing against them, guiding them forward in a maze of shadows. After what felt like hours, they stumbled into a larger room, its stone walls covered in the same cryptic symbols, only now painted in a dark, dried red. In the center of the chamber lay a skeletal figure, its bony fingers curled around something they couldn't quite make out. Its head was tilted to the side, and on its skull sat a tarnished mask, cracked and crumbling, with hollow eyes staring out as if waiting for something or someone. Lucy gasped, stepping back, her flashlight shaking in her hand. "Marcus, this isn't what I expected. This is something else." Marcus felt a chill creep up his spine, but his curiosity outweighed his fear. He knelt down, examining the skeleton's hands. Beneath the brittle bones, a leather-bound book lay open, its pages filled with unfamiliar symbols and faded ink. As he reached for it, a gust of cold air blew through the room, extinguishing their lights. The darkness was absolute, and in that silence, they heard it, a woman's voice, soft and melodic, chanting words that sent a shiver down their spines. Suddenly, the door they had entered through slammed shut, sealing them in. Marcus scrambled to relight his flashlight, his pulse racing, only to realize that Lucy was no longer beside him. "Lucy," he called, his voice echoing off the stone walls. There was no answer. Panic set in as he stumbled forward, shining his flashlight around the room. The shadows seemed to grow, darkening and stretching until they became almost tangible, pressing in on him from all sides. The whispering grew louder, and he could feel the presence of something unseen, watching, waiting. "Lucy," he shouted again, his voice trembling. Still, there was no response. The chanting grew louder, the voice filling the room, surrounding him. The walls felt as though they were breathing, pulsating with a life of their own. As he backed away, Marcus tripped, falling hard onto the stone floor. In the dim light, he saw that the skeleton had shifted, its head now facing him, empty eye sockets seemingly filled with a malevolent gleam. Desperation fueled his movements as he scrambled to his feet, banging on the door with all his strength. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the symbols pulsing as if alive. He heard footsteps, small, shuffling movements, and spun around, hoping to see Lucy, but there was no one. Only shadows danced across the room, figures half-formed, reaching out to him. Suddenly, a hand touched his shoulder. He turned, relief flooding him at the sight of Lucy, though her face was pale, eyes wide with horror. "We need to leave. Now," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the relentless chanting. Together, they pushed against the door, their combined strength finally forcing it open. They bolted down the corridor, their footsteps echoing in the narrow passage. But the whispers followed, hissing, calling, urging them to turn back. They reached the stairs and climbed, lungs burning, darkness seeming to pull at them, as if unwilling to let them go. They burst into the open air, gasping, the afternoon light blinding after the oppressive darkness below. Marcus fell to his knees, his chest heaving as he tried to process what had happened. Lucy stood beside him, silent and shaken, her gaze fixed on the ground. Let's never do that again," Marcus managed to say, his voice hoarse. But when he looked up, he found himself alone. Lucy was gone, the silence around him absolute. He called her name, but there was no response. He checked his phone, no missed calls, no messages. Confused, he staggered back to his car, wondering if the shadows of the tunnels had followed him above ground. That night, he tried calling Lucy, but every attempt went to voicemail. Frustrated and disoriented, he searched online, finding no trace of her. No friends, no family, nothing. It was as if she'd never existed, haunted and alone, Marcus returned to the row of houses a few days later, hoping to find some explanation, some proof of what he'd experienced. But the tunnels, it seemed, had vanished. Every door was locked, every entrance sealed, as though they had never been opened. The houses remained silent, their secrets buried, leaving Marcus with only memories and a lingering, gnawing fear that something unseen was watching him. In the days that followed, Marcus began hearing whispers, soft voices calling his name from darkened corners, echoes that seemed to follow him wherever he went. And at night, in his dreams, he wandered through endless tunnels, always searching for Lucy, always hearing the faint sounds of chanting and laughter echoing through the shadows. As he lay awake in the darkness, he wondered if he had truly escaped the tunnels, or if he was still lost within them, trapped in an endless maze of shadows and secrets, bound to the curse of the abandoned houses forever. Story 5. Ghosts of Abandoned High-Rises. The towering high-rise loomed over the downtown skyline, its darkened windows casting shadows over the nearby streets even in broad daylight. For years, it had been the subject of local legends and whispered rumors, the centerpiece of countless ghost stories. Closed indefinitely after a series of construction accidents and unexplained deaths, it had become a haunting landmark, a place that no one dared enter. But for Celia, a paranormal investigator known for her fearless explorations, it was the ultimate prize. She had heard the stories. Construction workers falling from great heights, others vanishing without a trace, and even a few reports of screams echoing from the top floors when no one was supposed to be inside. Determined to capture irrefutable evidence of the supernatural, Celia gathered her equipment, ready to face whatever spirits lurked in the forsaken structure. As dusk settled, casting the building in shadow, she stood at its base, staring up at its imposing height. Her breath fogged in the evening chill, but she took a steadying breath and made her way inside. The lobby was vast, filled with remnants of half-completed projects, scattered tools, faded blueprints, abandoned scaffolding, and dust coating everything in a thin film. Armed with a flashlight, a thermal camera, and her recording equipment, Celia navigated the empty hallways, her footsteps echoing against the walls. The silence was heavy, as though the building itself were holding its breath, waiting. A strange sense of anticipation filled the air, prickling the back of her neck as she moved through the building, floor by floor, pausing occasionally to listen. Each floor had its own unsettling feel. Cold spots near the windows, flickers of movement in the corner of her eye, and strange whispers that seemed to come from just ahead, only to vanish when she moved closer. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of climbing stairs and traversing endless hallways, Celia reached the top floor. The air was colder here, and each step felt weighted, as though something unseen were pushing back against her. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating empty rooms where drywall hung in tatters and broken glass littered the floor. But she felt something else too, a presence, a deep, bone-chilling awareness that she was not alone. She reached the final set of stairs that led to the rooftop. With her heart pounding, she climbed the steps, feeling the weight of 100 stories pressing down on her, her own vertigo mingling with a sense of dread. Pushing open the rooftop door, she stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights stretching out beneath her, sparkling like stars. For a moment, she stood in awe of the view. Then, from the corner of her eye, she caught movement. She turned, her flashlight illuminating a shadowy figure near the ledge. As she stared, the figure solidified, a man in a worker's uniform, staring at her with hollow, sorrowful eyes. Celia's breath caught in her throat as the man took a step forward, but just as quickly, he began to fall, his form disintegrating in a mist before he hit the ground below. Panicked, she spun around, only to see another figure, a woman this time, also in construction gear, walking toward her, a vacant, haunting look in her eyes. The woman's lips moved, as though whispering something, but no sound came out. And then, as if on cue, more shadows appeared, gathering near the ledge and around the edges of the rooftop, their shapes indistinct but unmistakably human. Workers, all of them, frozen in the last moments of their lives, eyes fixed on her as if waiting for something. One of the figures, a man with a hard hat tilted at an odd angle, stepped forward. His face was etched with terror, his gaze hollow, haunted. He raised a hand, reaching out to Celia. The gesture was almost pleading. "Leave this place," he whispered, his voice a faint, chilling echo that barely reached her ears. "There is a darkness here. It took us all." A cold shiver ran down her spine. She took a step back, clutching her camera, her hand trembling as she filmed the ghostly scene unfolding before her. She could feel it now, the oppressive weight of something dark, something malignant lurking just beneath the surface. The ghostly figures began to sway, as if compelled by some unseen force, inching closer to her, their faces twisted with fear and pain. And then, as she watched, they began to fall, one by one, stepping off the edge of the building, only to vanish in a mist before they reached the ground. In the thick of her terror, Celia felt a sudden, violent gust of wind, knocking her back toward the edge of the rooftop. She struggled for balance, her heart racing as she realized that the presence, the darkness the man had warned her about, was pulling her, urging her closer to the ledge. She fought against it, her mind reeling, every instinct telling her to run. But her feet felt rooted to the spot, as though something unseen held her in place. Just as she felt herself teetering, the shadowy figure of the man reappeared in front of her, his face twisted in pain and desperation. He reached out, his fingers brushing her arm, anchoring her just enough for her to snap back into awareness. With a burst of strength, she tore herself free from the invisible force, stumbling backward toward the door. The rooftop door seemed miles away, but she sprinted, her heartbeat thundering in her ears, the whispers of the ghostly figures fading into a dreadful silence. She barreled down the stairs, stumbling and nearly falling with each step, her mind filled with images of the faces she had seen. Faces etched with fear, trapped in an endless loop of falling, forever bound to the cursed high-rise. Finally, she reached the ground floor, bursting out into the cold night air. She didn't stop running until she was several blocks away, gasping for breath, her mind reeling with what she had just witnessed. Her camera was still clutched in her hand, and though her heart was pounding, she was filled with a morbid curiosity. She needed to know if her camera had captured what her eyes had seen. When she returned home, she plugged in her camera, her fingers trembling as she hit play. At first, the footage showed nothing unusual, just the empty rooms, the rooftop, and the city lights beyond. But then, as the camera panned, she saw them, the shadowy figures standing at the ledge, staring back at her with hollow eyes. Their faces were unmistakable, each expression frozen in a moment of terror, each one a silent witness to the horror they had endured. But as she watched, something chilling began to happen. The faces in the footage slowly turned, shifting until they were all looking directly into the camera, their eyes fixed on her as if they could see her even through the screen. Their expressions twisted into something darker, more knowing, as though they understood that she was watching and waiting for her. Every time she played the footage, it was the same. The faces of the workers would stare, unblinking, as though they had been watching her all along. She tried deleting the footage, but every time she did, it would reappear on her device, the spectral faces even clearer than before. Soon, she began to see them everywhere. In her dreams, in darkened reflections, even in crowds, glimpses of hollow eyes watching her from afar. The high-rise had left its mark, and Celia couldn't shake the feeling that its ghosts were with her now, following her every step. She had escaped the building, but the shadows of the workers, lost souls bound by the darkness within those walls, were now bound to her. Their silent, haunted faces a constant reminder that some places are never truly abandoned, and that she would never truly be alone again. As the final tale draws to a close, the narrator's voice returns, deeper and more resonant, weaving together the threads of each eerie story. The houses, once disparate entities with their own secrets and horrors, suddenly seem connected, bound by something ancient and malevolent. a shadow that stretches across the entire town, entwining itself with anyone foolish enough to wander too close. You might think these tales are mere stories. The narrator begins, their tone somber, with a hint of something darker lurking beneath. But I assure you, they are far more than that. Each house you have read about was once a home, a sanctuary. They were places of laughter, comfort, and hope before something twisted within them, turning them into traps for the unwary. Each abandoned place holds memories, both good and evil, and not all those memories fade with time. They linger, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for someone to disturb them. The narrator's words become almost a warning, directed not only at the characters who wandered through these forsaken places, but at the reader themselves, as though addressing an unseen audience on the brink of their own supernatural entanglement. Curiosity may seem harmless, even a virtue at times, but there's a reason so many warn against tempting the unknown. These tales serve as cautionary whispers, echoes of past lives who sought what they should have left alone. A pause, and the silence that follows is heavy, as if the narrator is choosing their words with careful, almost reverent precision. What if I told you that all these homes, these cursed forgotten places, are bound together by a single thread, a curse as ancient as the stones beneath this town? From the locked basement of the mansion to the high rises that claw at the sky, from tunnels buried beneath the earth to echoes that linger long after the last footsteps have faded, each is connected. Each is part of a grander tapestry, woven from the lives of those who never escaped their grasp. The narrator's voice softens, adopting a more reflective tone, a voice weighed down by years of unseen experience. Perhaps I know more than I let on. Perhaps these stories are not just tales, but pieces of something personal, fragments of things I've seen, of things I've lived. You might wonder if I, too, have been ensnared by these places. Perhaps I have. Perhaps I am another spirit bound to these haunted locations, reliving the memories of those who came before me, trapped like the others who could never break free. There's a lingering pause, and then a whisper, so faint it barely seems part of the narrative, as if a shadow is brushing past your ear. Maybe I am still here, watching, waiting for others to follow the same path. The narrator's tone shifts again, adopting a chilling finality, and yet there's something tantalizingly unresolved. But the tales don't end here. Another house has just been abandoned in town, one whose doors are yet to be opened, whose shadows are yet to welcome their next guest. A house that waits, with a patience only the cursed know, for someone to cross its threshold. The narrator's voice lingers on this last thought, an invitation wrapped in foreboding. The idea settles in your mind like an uneasy seed, suggesting that perhaps it's not just the townsfolk or the characters in these stories who are affected by the curse. Perhaps the curse is far-reaching, extending its influence beyond the town's borders. Perhaps it's come to your doorstep, patiently lying in wait, a shadow hovering just out of sight. And with that, the narrator leaves you with an unsettling final thought. Beware, dear reader, of the allure of the unknown. For you too may someday find yourself drawn to such places, unaware of the dangers hidden in their silence. Remember, some mysteries are better left undisturbed. And should you hear whispers beckoning you from an empty room, or feel a chill in a place where no draft should be, perhaps you'll remember these stories. And perhaps you'll resist the urge to look further. But if not, the voice fades, leaving behind an ominous silence. And with it, the disturbing possibility that the tales you've read are not mere stories, but a warning, a glimpse into a curse that endures, lying in wait for its next curious visitor. And as you close the book, the sensation remains, as though eyes are watching you from a shadowed doorway, and a cold chill creeps down your spine. Somewhere, out there in the town, another house stands empty, its door unlocked, its shadows lengthening in anticipation.